My name is Adrian Kellerman, and I have been a member of the Riverside Community Paranormal Experience Support Group for exactly 6 months. I joined because I needed something: stability, understanding, or maybe just a room full of people whose eyes didn't glaze over when I admitted that I sometimes woke up with the sense that someone else's dream was still clinging to me. The group wasn't mystical or dramatic. It met in a beige classroom at the community center every other Thursday. The same scratched plastic table, the same flickering exit sign, the same quietly desperate people who were tired of pretending their lives were normal. We were a small circle, 9 regulars, each with our own odd history, each trying to stay grounded. Everything about it was predictable, which strangely comforted me. That's why I noticed the moment something shifted, even before the stranger walked in. The air felt heavier, like the humidity had jumped, and I remember the sound of the wall clock slowing just enough for me to question if I was imagining it. The meeting started at 6 o'clock, just like always. I arrived a few minutes early to help our facilitator, a soft-spoken woman named Denise, set out the metal folding chairs. She always carried a clipboard, always wrote everyone's name whether she needed to or not, and always placed a cheap electric candle in the center of the circle to symbolize that we were, as she put it, sharing the weight of one light. I was adjusting a chair when she asked me how my week had been, and I gave her the same vague answer I always did: quiet, manageable, nothing new. That was almost true. I had been waking up earlier than usual, with a prickling sensation behind my ribs, like I'd forgotten something important. I didn't think that part mattered. The others trickled in around 6. Rachel was chewing her fingernail and trying not to cry. She'd been hearing knocking noises again. Emilio wore sunglasses even indoors, claiming bright light made the walls move. Hannah carried a sketchbook everywhere and had drawn another faceless figure she said kept appearing at the foot of her bed. Normal stuff for us, not normal for anyone else. We settled in, the candle hummed faintly, and the fluorescent lights buzzed the way they always did. Denise began with her usual introduction, reminding us we were in a confidential space, that we were here to support one another, and that nothing we discussed would ever leave the room. I had heard this speech many times, but she hesitated halfway through. Her hand froze on the clipboard. Her eyes shifted toward the door a split second before it opened. She hadn't heard footsteps. None of us had. A man stepped inside. He wasn't old, but he looked worn. Mid-40s, maybe, tall, lean, dressed in a gray jacket that had dried mud on the sleeves. His dark hair hung over his forehead like he hadn't washed it in days. His eyes were the first thing I noticed. Pale, fixed, and unsettlingly still. People usually entered with awkward half-smiles, apologies, excuses. He didn't. He simply stood there, taking in all of us in one slow sweep, as if making sure each face matched something already stored in his memory. Denise cleared her throat, trying to recover her professional tone. Hello, can we help you?" The man nodded once, as if answering an entirely different question. "I'm here for the group." Nobody recognized him. We never had spontaneous walk-ins. People who joined usually found the group through counseling or referrals. Denise asked his name. He paused for a moment too long before speaking. "Call me Marcus." The delay wasn't dramatic enough to be theatrical, but long enough that everyone noticed. Rachel sat up straighter. Emilio slid his sunglasses down just enough to peek over them. I kept my eyes on Marcus, trying not to let my tension show. He walked slowly to the last open chair and lowered himself into it without looking away from the candle. His movements were controlled, deliberate in a way that felt practiced or learned. Denise tried to resume the meeting, but her voice trembled before evening out. She introduced each of us, though we all already knew one another. When she gestured to me, Marcus's head tilted slightly, like he was studying something behind me rather than me itself. The hairs on my arms lifted. I didn't know why. We went around the circle, sharing our updates. Rachel's knocking noises had returned. Emilio had seen reflections that didn't copy his movements. Hannah said she woke up standing in her hallway, unsure how she'd gotten there. All of this was familiar enough that my breathing stayed steady. But when it was Marcus's turn, the room shifted again. He didn't clear his throat or fidget or hesitate. His words came out soft, level, almost rehearsed. I'm here because something has been following me. Denise encouraged him to elaborate gently, in the way facilitators do. But he didn't look at her. He looked at the candle again. It started this morning, he said. It stays close. It listens. I thought coming here might distract it. I felt a cold, sinking pull in my stomach. It wasn't what he said. It was the way he said it, as if we all already knew what he meant or should have. Denise exchanged a quick glance with me. She probably expected me to jump in, like I sometimes did when new members felt nervous. But Marcus didn't seem nervous. He seemed prepared. He folded his hands neatly in his lap. It doesn't like when I talk, he added. So if I stop suddenly, that's why. Rachel whimpered. Emilio whispered something in Spanish under his breath. Hannah shut her eyes tight and gripped her sketchbook. The fluorescent lights flickered once, then twice, then stayed dimmer than before. Marcus finally looked at me directly. His pale eyes didn't blink. It followed me in here, he said quietly. I think it wants someone else now. I didn't want to show that his words got under my skin, but they did. Something about the way Marcus said someone else made it feel less like a warning and more like a decision that had already been made. The room had fallen so quiet that I could hear the whir of the ceiling vent, steady and low, but somehow it sounded farther away than before. Denise tried to break the silence, her professional training kicking in even though she looked like she might be seconds from fleeing. Marcus, she said gently, if something is distressing you, we can help talk through it. You're safe here. He tilted his head slightly, like he was listening for something none of us could hear. I know, he murmured. That's why it followed me. It's curious. It doesn't usually move between people. His voice softened at the end, as though he wasn't talking to us, but to whatever he believed was listening. I tried to ground myself. This was a support group. People said strange things when they were overwhelmed. It didn't have to mean anything. Shouldn't mean anything. But everything inside me kept turning over that same cold feeling. The one that had started before he even walked in, like the atmosphere knew something we didn't. Denise shifted the conversation the way facilitators do when they're desperate to maintain structure. Why don't we pause for a moment? She said with a shaky smile. Let's all take a breath. She lifted her hand toward the candle, a gesture we used sometimes to recenter. Normally, we'd follow suit, all of us breathing together in a slow, synchronized pattern. But the room didn't breathe with us. The air felt stale and unmoving. The candle flame stretched upward, thinner than it should have been, as if pulled by a string. And Marcus leaned back in his chair, eyes fixed on me again. Felt like being pinned. I forced myself to speak, even though my throat felt too tight. What exactly is following you? I asked. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. A person? An animal? A hallucination? What does that mean? His eyes lit faintly, just enough that it made my stomach dip. Something between those things, he said. Not a hallucination. Not for me anyway. It becomes real enough for whoever it chooses. Rachel whimpered again, and this time she covered her ears. Emilio started tapping his heel against the tile floor, fast, in a rhythm that reminded me of someone trying to stay awake. Hannah had opened her sketchbook, flipping through rapidly as if searching for a picture she hadn't drawn yet. Denise exhaled sharply. Marcus, this is a space for grounding thoughts, not feeding them. I think it's best if we... The door clicked, not opened, not moved, just clicked, as if someone had touched the handle from the outside. All of us turned toward it instantly. The hallway outside was empty through the narrow window, but something was off. I didn't hear the normal sounds of the community center. No distant footsteps, No rolling carts from the janitor's closet. No murmuring voices from the yoga class down the hall. Silence pressed against the glass like a fog. "It's here," Marcus whispered. I hated the way my heart responded to those words, jerking suddenly, then beating hard enough to feel in my throat. This wasn't supposed to be happening. This day had started normally. This meeting had started normally. We were 9 people in a fluorescent-lit room with a clipboard and an electric candle. We were supposed to be safe in our small, predictable corner of reality. Denise tried to stand, but she only managed halfway before stumbling and catching the back of her chair for balance. "I'm calling security," she said, though she didn't move toward the phone. "This is inappropriate. You're scaring people." Marcus didn't look at her. He didn't acknowledge her at all. He slowly lifted his hand and pointed. Not at the door, not at the candle, not at any single person, but toward the dead center of the circle. At empty air. "It's standing right there." Rachel gasped so loudly it almost made me flinch. Emilio muttered a prayer. Hannah dropped her sketchbook, the pages fanning across the floor like pale feathers. I swallowed, trying to keep my voice steady. "Nothing is there." He finally blinked. Once. Slowly. "It doesn't want you to see it yet." The air dropped 10 degrees in a breath. Not metaphorically. Not emotionally. Actually. A sudden cold that slithered across my arms and crawled down my spine. I could see each person in the room react at the same moment. Their shoulders tightening, their breath fogging slightly in the dimmer light. The candle flickered, bending toward the center of the circle. Not away from it. Denise's voice wavered. "Marcus, you need to stop. Right now. Whatever game or delusion this is, you're frightening everyone. I need you to calm down." "I'm calm," he said simply. "It's you it's watching." Her eyes widened. She looked at me, searching for something, support, explanation, anything. I had nothing to give. The door clicked again. This time, the handle turned. All of us froze. The handle pressed down halfway, held for a moment, then released, swinging back up with a soft metallic snap. No one entered. No footsteps followed. No shadow slipped beneath the door. Marcus exhaled like something had just confirmed his expectations. "It likes this room," he said. "It likes you people. You're familiar." A shiver ran up my spine. Familiar? How could anything be familiar with us? I started to say his name, but the word stuck in my throat as the overhead lights dimmed another notch. The walls seemed to press inward by fractions, and the air thickened to the point where breathing felt like pushing through wet fabric. Marcus finally looked away from the empty space in the center of our circle. His gaze settled on me. "It hasn't chosen yet," he said softly, "but it's getting impatient." And then soft, unmistakable, human. Something breathed behind me. I didn't move at first. Nobody would've. When something you can't see breathes against the back of your neck, your body goes rigid on instinct, like freezing will somehow keep whatever it is from noticing you're alive. The air puffed warm and moist against my skin, unmistakably human. But the room was cold enough that I could see the condensation of my own exhale float like smoke. I tried to tell myself one of the others had stepped behind me, but I could see every member of the group from the corner of my vision. They were all rooted to their chairs, staring at me as if waiting for my reaction would tell them what reality we were still standing in. I forced myself to turn my head an inch. Just enough. Nothing was there. The space behind me was empty. A worn beige wall with a motivational poster half peeling off. A sunrise over a mountain. But the air behind me still carried that fading warmth, like someone had only now stepped away. I realized then that Marcus was watching me with a kind of quiet interest, not smug, not delighted, just curious, observing, as if he were seeing how I would react to something he already understood. "Did it touch you?" he asked softly. I didn't answer. My mouth felt too dry. Denise finally broke. She shoved her chair back so fast it screeched across the tile. This is enough," she said, her voice rising sharply. "I'm getting help." Her hands fumbled with her phone, but she managed to get past her passcode. She turned for the door, gripping the handle tightly, and pulled. Nothing happened. She pulled harder. The metal rattled, but the door didn't open. The lock wasn't engaged. I could see the small red indicator wasn't showing. She tried again, this time with her shoulder braced, panic slipping through her controlled expression. Why isn't it? She tugged again, but the door stayed shut. It doesn't want us leaving yet, Marcus said. Rachel burst into tears at that, covering her mouth with both hands. Emilio stood halfway, then sat again quickly, as if something had pressed him back down. Hannah scooped up her sketchbook from the floor, flipping the pages with frantic fingers, like she was searching for a specific drawing. But her hands were trembling too violently to focus. Denise slammed her palm against the door. Hello? Is someone out there? The door's stuck. Her voice echoed down the hall, only it didn't sound right. It came back warped, slightly delayed, as though the hallway were longer than it should have been, as though her words were traveling farther than they ever had to reach another human being. Marcus listened like he was savoring the sound. I looked at the others, trying to ground myself in them, in their presence, in the shared fear that maybe could be explained. Anxiety could warp perception. Door frames could swell. Air vents could create temperature pockets. I clung to those thoughts like a rope, but they slipped the moment I felt another faint shift in the air, like the room inhaled around us. Emilio whispered, "Esta más cerca," is closer. Marcus nodded, barely perceptible. "It's curious about you," he murmured. "It doesn't normally get this close this soon." My voice finally returned. "Why me? You looked at the seat before it did," he said simply. "That's rude to it." My stomach dropped. "I didn't look at anything. You glanced at the empty chair. That's how it starts noticing people. Attention is a kind of invitation." I stared at him, trying to piece together whether he believed what he was saying, or whether he wanted us to believe it. The worst part was that nothing in his face told me he was lying. He wasn't trying to manipulate. He wasn't trying to intimidate. He was stating facts the way someone might recite a bus schedule. Denise was still pulling on the door, her breathing fast and uneven. Something is wrong with the lock. The center staff must have jammed it. But something about her words rang hollow. She didn't believe it either. Hannah suddenly stopped flipping her sketchbook. Her hand froze mid-motion, and her eyes widened as she stared at a single page. The rest of us turned toward her. "What?" I asked cautiously. She swallowed. I didn't draw this." Her voice cracked mid-sentence. She turned the sketchbook around to show us. On the page was a charcoal outline of our group, our exact positions, our chairs, the candle, the walls. It was our current setup, drawn in heavy, smudged strokes. But in the center of the circle, where no one sat, there was a dark mass, not human-shaped but humanoid in suggestion. Elongated, slumped forward, its head angled toward my chair. The charcoal figure wasn't sharply defined. It was all shadow and suggestion, but the posture was unmistakable. It was leaning toward me. Rachel covered her eyes. No. Did you draw this earlier?" I asked, my voice tight. Hannah shook her head hard. "No," she whispered. "This wasn't here. I haven't used the charcoal today." Denise stopped tugging the door long enough to look at the drawing, and horror settled across her face. She reached for the light switch beside the door. "Let's just turn the lights all the way on," she said. "Sometimes dim lighting can cause optical illusions. If we brighten the room, it might." She flipped the switch. Nothing happened. The lights didn't brighten. They didn't dim further. They didn't flicker. They stayed exactly the same muted, oppressive hue they had fallen to earlier, denying us even the shallow comfort of change. Denise pressed the switch again, and again, and again, faster, frantic. The lights ignored her. Marcus let out a long exhale. "It's almost time." "For what?" I demanded. For it to pick. His eyes shifted back toward the empty space in the circle. It always picks when the room closes. Closes? I echoed. He nodded slowly. We're already inside it. I looked toward the hallway window, the one set into the door. The glass reflected the room perfectly. Chairs, candle, people. And then, for the briefest moment, the reflection showed one extra shape. Tall one, leaning forward behind my chair. I blinked. It was gone. My pulse hammered in my ears. We need to get out, I said. Now. Denise shook her head sharply, eyes wild. The door's stuck. We can't. We can break it, I said. We can go through the window if we need to. She looked at the tiny horizontal window in the wall. That barely fits my forearm. Then we try something else, I insisted. We're not staying here. A soft, slow tapping echoed from behind us. 3 taps, then 2, then 1. Marcus's voice dropped to a whisper. It's asking. My mouth dried. Asking what? His eyes slid to mine. Who it gets to keep. The tapping settled into the bones of the room like it belonged there, like it had been waiting for a moment quiet enough to make its presence undeniable. 3 taps. 2, 1. A pattern that didn't feel like knocking, it felt like counting. And something about that rhythm made my skin prickle, because it didn't sound like fingers on wood or metal. It sounded hollow, like tapping from the inside of a deeper space, a place with more room than the classroom could physically contain. I stepped instinctively away from my chair, needing distance from where I'd felt that breath against me. The others did the same without speaking. The entire group broke its circle formation at once, like a flock scattering from a predator's shadow. Only Marcus remained seated, hands folded, eyes trained somewhere above us, listening the way someone listens for instructions rather than sounds. Stop tapping, Denise said loudly, though she didn't turn toward Marcus or anyone else. It was a command thrown into the air, as if naming the sound might give her some small control. But the tapping stopped on its own. The sudden silence hit harder than the noise. Rachel was crying openly now, her breath sharp and fast. Emilio stood behind her, hands hovering uselessly, not sure whether touching her would ground her or make everything worse. Hannah clutched her sketchbook so tightly the paper edges bent in her grip. I moved toward the door and grabbed the handle, twisted it hard, more violently than Denise had. It didn't budge. I yanked with both hands, braced my foot against the wall, and pulled until my muscles burned. Nothing. No give, no shift. Not even the rattling sound of metal moving. It was like the door frame had fused itself into a single piece. It's not a normal door anymore, Marcus said behind me, his voice maddeningly calm. You're trying to open it the wrong way. I spun toward him. What does that mean? It closed after we started, he replied. This room doesn't open outward anymore. It opens inward. I stared at him. Doors don't do that. This one does. Denise snapped. Enough. Her voice cracked under the strain. You are not helping anyone. You are not contributing to a supportive environment. You are frightening this entire group. And I need you to stop speaking unless I ask you a direct question. Marcus blinked slowly, a tiny gesture of acknowledgement, but he didn't look scared. He didn't look angry or offended. He looked like he understood something we didn't, and that alone was a special kind of terror. A sound, soft but unmistakable, drew our attention back to the center of the room. A slow exhale. Not mine. Not anyone's in the group. It came from the empty space where the circle had been. Denise instinctively stepped back until she hit the wall. If you're hearing things, she said, her voice shaking through the lie, it's stress. Everyone is under stress. We need to sit down. We need to breathe. We need to. Her words cut off. She wasn't looking at us anymore. She was staring at Hannah's sketchbook. At an open page Hannah hadn't turned to. None of us had. Another drawing. One none of us remembered seeing. It showed the room again, almost identical to the previous image, but now the shadow figure in the center was larger, taller. The charcoal shading was darker, thicker, as though layers had been drawn over and over the same area. And the figure was leaning further forward, its suggestion of a head angled toward me from above instead of behind. The breath I'd felt on my neck. It wasn't a hallucination. Hannah whispered, "I didn't draw that. I swear I didn't." Nobody questioned her. The air felt heavier with each passing second, like something enormous was inhaling slowly, gradually shrinking the space around us with every breath. "We have to pick someone," Marcus said quietly. My stomach twisted. "Pick for what?" "To end it," he replied. "It can't leave until the room decides." "Decides what?" I demanded. He exhaled, almost sympathetic. "Who stays?" "No," Denise said instantly. "No, nobody is staying. This is delusion. This is panic. Nobody is staying anywhere." Her voice grew harder as she spoke, fighting her own trembling. "This group does not participate in." A sharp snapping sound cut her off. It came from the fluorescent lights above us. One of the tubes cracked, a thin fissure running down its length like ice breaking under weight. Then another tube cracked beside it, and another, each sound echoing like brittle bones shifting. The room dimmed further. What little light was left seemed to pull away from the center of the circle, retreating into corners, leaving that middle space unnaturally shadowed despite the electric candle sitting inches from it. The candle's light didn't reach the center. It bent around it, as if something invisible stood there, absorbing every flicker. Rachel screamed, a raw, terrified sound that ripped straight from her chest. Emilio grabbed her arm and pulled her away from the shadowed area. I felt my pulse pounding in my teeth. "We're choosing no one," I said fiercely, stepping away from the center. "We're getting out of this room. We'll break the window, smash the vent, anything." Marcus shook his head. "You can try, but it won't matter if you don't choose." "What happens if we don't?" I asked. He paused. His eyes softened, almost as if he pitied me. "It'll choose for us." A thump echoed through the room, not from the walls, not from the floor, from the air above us. A second thump. The third. I looked up. The ceiling tiles were bowing downward as though something enormous was pressing against them from the other side. Dust sifted down in soft gray clouds. The tiles quivered, bulging, threatening to break. Hannah clamped both hands over her mouth, staring upward. Denise whispered, "Dear God," and then, too close, too loud. A low whisper drifted down from the ceiling. Closer. The ceiling dipped lower. Rachel sobbed uncontrollably. Emilio dragged her toward the far wall. Hannah pressed herself into the corner, sketchbook held to her chest like a shield. I backed toward the window, gripping the metal frame. I couldn't look away as the ceiling tile directly above me split down the center, a thin crack widening like a mouth opening. Behind me, Marcus whispered one final sentence. "It likes how you look at it." The crack widened with the slow, dreadful patience of something that didn't need to rush. A thin line of dust drifted down from the ceiling, catching the weak light like falling ash. I pressed myself harder against the wall beneath the window, fingers digging into the metal frame until they hurt. The tile above me bulged further, bending with a soft groan. Hannah whimpered from the corner, a raw, wounded sound, and Rachel's crying turned into panicked gasps. The ceiling gave another shudder. Something shifted above it, heavy, deliberate, like weight sliding into position. Denise shook herself from frozen shock. "Adrian," she said, barely audible, "move." I didn't need to be told twice. I ducked and rolled away from the wall just as the ceiling tile above me dipped violently, bending downward until it nearly touched the top of the chair I'd been sitting in earlier. A deep, slow breath exhaled through the widening crack, warm enough that the air shimmered where it touched the colder room. I scrambled across the floor, nearly knocking into Emilio as he braced Rachel against him. "What is it?" Rachel sobbed. "What is it doing?" Marcus answered before anyone else could. "Trying to enter this side. It's easier when the room is small. Easier when we're cornered." "Shut up." Denise snapped at him, her voice shaking. "Stop telling us what it wants." He didn't argue. He didn't look offended. He simply folded his hands again, as though preparing for whatever came next. The crack spread across the ceiling like a branching river. A thin blackness seeped through the gaps between tiles. Not smoke, not shadow, something else. Something with depth. Something that absorbed the light around it. Emilio pointed toward the far wall. "The vent!" he shouted. "We can get through the vent." I looked. The metal grate near the floor was small, too small for an adult, but panic made us reach for impossible ideas. Denise dropped to her knees, yanking at the screws with her fingers, scraping skin until she bled. Hannah crawled beside her, shaking but helping, tugging at the edge with trembling hands. The ceiling groaned again. A web of cracks radiated outward, flexing downward like the whole surface was breathing. "Faster!" Denise gasped. "Come on! Come on!" Rachel covered her ears and rocked in place, whispering, "No, no, no, no," over and over. Emilio crouched in front of her, shielding her from falling debris as dust drifted down like gray snow. I grabbed a chair and swung it at the vent, metal clanging against metal. The screws loosened slightly. I swung again, harder. The chair bent. The vent shuddered. Something above us whispered, "Closer." Marcus's eyes flicked upward. "It's starting to choose," he murmured. I hated him. I hated how calm he was. I hated how he always sounded like he knew the rules and we didn't. I wanted to shake him, scream at him, force him to tell me what was happening. But then I saw what he was staring at. The ceiling crack had aligned directly above me again. Not above the door. Not above the center of the circle. Not above any of the others. Me. I stumbled backward. Denise noticed. "Adrian, keep moving." The vent gave another metallic screech as I kicked it repeatedly, ignoring the pain lancing up my leg. The grate finally buckled inward, exposing a dark horizontal duct barely wide enough for a child. Definitely not for any of us. "No one fits," Hannah whispered. "We'll make it bigger," Denise insisted, voice spiraling into desperation. We'll force it." A heavy weight landed above the ceiling with a thud that shook the entire room. Dust rained down in a thick cloud. Rachel screamed again, curling into a tight ball on the floor. Emilio held her tighter, his eyes huge and terrified. Hannah clutched my sleeve. "Adrian, it's over you." I looked up. The tile split open entirely. The piece of ceiling fell, shattering against the floor inches from my feet. A rush of warm, humid air poured into the room, carrying a smell like damp earth and old breath. The darkness above wasn't just emptiness. It pulsed faintly, like a heart beating behind a thin wall. Something shifted within it. Not arms or legs or anything human, but movement with direction and intent. Something leaning down toward me. "No," Denise whispered. "No, no, it's not picking. There's no picking, this isn't." "Adrian." Marcus's voice cut through the panic like a thread pulled taut. "Don't look at it." But it was too late. The darkness pressed lower, dipping beneath the line of the ceiling. It didn't have a face, but I felt eyes on me. Not seen, felt. Like pressure behind my ribs, pushing outward, searching. I choked on my own breath and stumbled backward, falling onto hands and knees. The tile pieces scattered around me like broken teeth. Hannah grabbed my arm, trying to haul me upright. The darkness inhaled. The electric candle flickered violently. The little flame-shaped bulb bent toward the ceiling, drawn upward like the heat of the room itself was being pulled into that widening void. "It's taking the light," Emilio whispered. "Not just the candle." The room dimmed further, shadows swelling and thickening until the corners blurred. Our silhouettes stretched and warped across the walls. Something brushed the top of my hair. Not a hand, not air. Something weightless, but deliberate. My body seized with a frozen, instinctive terror, the kind that didn't come from thought but from ancient memory. Prey recognizing a predator. "Adrian, move!" Denise cried. I tried. My limbs didn't obey. The darkness above me pulsed. It whispered again, closer, almost curious. "Here." And then, the pressure released, like something had been pushed back forcibly. Marcus rose from his chair for the first time. Quietly, calmly, like he'd decided something. "It changed its mind," he said softly. The darkness above me recoiled slightly. Then it shifted, pivoted, angling toward the others. Specifically, toward Rachel. She screamed, a sound so sharp it cut the air. The ceiling cracked above her, dust pouring down, and whatever was in that darkness wanted her now. Rachel's scream cut through the room like a nerve snapping. She scrambled backward on her hands, shoes slipping on the tile as she tried to crawl through Emilio's legs. He grabbed her shoulders, whispering frantically in Spanish, voice trembling so hard the words were barely coherent. The ceiling above her let out another deep, resonant crack, as if the surface were straining under something that suddenly had weight and hunger. I forced myself to stand, every muscle trembling. The air felt thick, humid and suffocating, pushing against my skin with invisible hands. That pulse from the ceiling, the thing behind it, shifted closer to Rachel's corner, bulging the tile in a slow, possessive swell. "Move her," I shouted, though my voice felt thin in the dense air. "Get her out of the corner." Denise ran to help Emilio drag her across the floor. She thrashed wildly, nails scraping the linoleum. "It's touching me. Oh God, it's touching me," she cried, shaking her arms as if shaking off insects. Nothing touched her that I could see, but the way her skin mottled in patches, blotches moving beneath the surface, made my stomach clench. Hannah clutched her sketchbook to her chest like a shield, and her voice came out a hoarse whisper. "It's choosing her. It's drawing her. It's..." She snapped the book open again. A new drawing waited inside. This one made every sliver of air in the room go still. It showed Rachel. Not seated, not screaming, but lifted, her silhouette floating inches above the floor. Her head angled sharply backward like her spine was being pulled by something above. The dark form in the center of the circle was no longer abstract. It stretched upward like a pillar of shadow, one vague suggestion of a limb wrapped around her torso. Rachel saw the drawing and let out a broken sob. "No, no, no, please, please." Emilio slapped the sketchbook from Hannah's hands. "Stop showing her that. Stop drawing that." "I didn't draw it," Hannah cried. "I didn't draw any of it." Rachel's body snapped upright violently, like someone yanked her spine from above. Emilio and Denise clung to her arms, trying to pull her down, but she rose onto her toes, her heels lifting from the ground as if strings pulled them upward. Her eyes rolled somewhere white and distant. Denise screamed her name. Marcus watched with that same eerie calm, though something in his expression had changed, tightened. Not fear, not pity, something closer to resignation. I felt something icy coil around my lower leg. At first I thought it was panic gripping me so hard it created phantom sensations. But when I looked down, the shadow on the floor wasn't behaving like shadow. It pooled from the ceiling's dark crack, stretching toward Rachel and toward me simultaneously, creeping like spilled oil that moved with intent instead of gravity. "Don't let it get your shadow," Marcus said suddenly. "It starts with the shadow. Once it connects, it can pull you without touching you." I jerked my leg away and stepped hard into the weak light remaining in the corners of the room. The shadow receded slightly, but not fully. Rachel wasn't screaming anymore. Her mouth hung open, breath fluttering like she was freezing. "Please, help me," she whispered, voice barely a thread. We're trying. Denise sobbed, her hands slick with sweat, trying to pull Rachel back down. Stay with me, Rachel. Look at me. Look at me. But Rachel's gaze wandered upward toward the widening tear in the ceiling. The ceiling finally gave way with a long, aching groan. A section about the size of a dinner plate fell, smashing beside us. Above it, a cavernous dark hollow yawned open. Not a ceiling cavity, not piping or insulation, nothing that belonged in a building. Just blackness, a void that shimmered faintly like heat on pavement. Something moved inside it. Rachel convulsed, her body rising another inch. Emilio wrapped both arms around her waist, straining, his muscles bulging with effort. "Ayadame," he shouted at us. "Help me hold her." I lunged forward, gripping Rachel's leg. Denise clung to the other, all of us pulling against something we couldn't see. Something that didn't breathe but moved like it did. Her foot slipped from my hand. The shadows in the room thickened at once, a ripple spreading across the floor like the room exhaled in satisfaction. Marcus took a step forward. It was the first time he'd looked unnerved. "This is earlier than usual," he murmured, almost to himself. "It usually waits longer." "What is it?" I shouted. "What does it want from her?" He looked at me with those pale, unreadable eyes. "It wants what it always wants. Someone who sees it." "But she didn't," I yelled. "She didn't look at anything." He shook his head. "She screamed." "That's the same thing." The shadow on the floor jumped, straight to Rachel's feet. She jerked upward another inch. "No!" Denise cried, her voice cracking. "Rachel, stay with us, stay." The lights flickered violently. Then Rachel stopped rising. Her head drooped forward, and for one fragile second the room went silent. "Rachel," Emilio whispered. "Nothing." He gently shook her shoulder. Her neck hung limp. "No, no, no, Rachel, poor favor," he pleaded, shaking harder. Her eyes snapped open suddenly, too wide, pupils dilated until only thin rims of color remained. She inhaled sharply, too sharply, and the air around her pulled inward with the breath. Every loose paper on the table lifted. Hannah's sketchbook fluttered like a trapped bird. Dust spiraled toward Rachel's mouth as if she were a vacuum pulling reality inward. "Back up," I yelled, dragging Denise away. But Emilio didn't let go. He held her, whispering her name over and over with a trembling voice, refusing to abandon her. Rachel's breath deepened unnaturally. The ceiling hollow above her pulsed once, and the shadows snapped upward. Rachel was yanked straight into the air, her body hitting the ceiling edge with a sickening thud. Emilio screamed and grabbed her ankle, trying to pull her down, but the shadows tightened around her like a noose. Her body rose, higher, higher, until half of her disappeared into the dark hollow. "Emilio, let go!" I shouted. He refused, so the darkness grabbed him too. His shadow stretched unnaturally toward the ceiling, flattening upward like it was being peeled from the floor. He screamed as his body lifted an inch, then collapsed when Denise grabbed him around the waist and yanked him backward with everything she had. Rachel's body vanished into the ceiling. Gone. No sound. No trace. Just gone. The hollow sealed shut behind her like wet clay smoothing over. Hannah collapsed to her knees. Denise screamed into her own hands. Emilio clawed at the floor, sobbing into the tile. But Marcus, he looked at the ceiling, calm, certain, and whispered, "It's not finished." The hollow sealed so seamlessly that if I hadn't watched Rachel disappear into it, I would have thought the ceiling had never broken at all. The tile looked smoother than before, unblemished, uncracked, as if the room had healed the wound it had made. But I could still hear something faint inside the walls. Not movement, not scraping, a single repetitive sound. Breathing. We all heard it. No one spoke. Rachel was gone. Not dead. Not in any way the human mind knows. but taken somewhere we couldn't imagine, somewhere beyond plaster and beams and anything a room should contain. Emilio lay on the floor, sobbing into the crook of his elbow, his entire body shaking with a grief too large to process. Denise stood frozen, both hands pressed over her mouth, her eyes unfocused and terror-shocked. Hannah sat with her knees pressed to her chest, rocking slightly, rocking like she might shatter if she stopped. Only Marcus remained steady. He stood at the edge of the fading shadow in the center of the room, observing the space where Rachel had vanished as though waiting for the next step in a sequence he already knew. And something about that, his composure, his acceptance, snapped something in me. I marched toward him until I was close enough to see the faint tremor in his jaw that he was trying to hide. "What is happening?" I hissed. "What did it do to her?" His eyes rose slowly to meet mine, pale and unblinking. "It keeps them." "For what?" My voice cracked. "For what, Marcus?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked toward the door, the one that wouldn't open, the one that had sealed us in. "It's not a what," he said at last. "It's a place. A place." I repeated, disbelief twisting through my voice. "People don't get swallowed by rooms, Marcus. That's not real." "This one does," he said simply. Before I could tear into him with another demand, the overhead lights buzzed sharply, as if jolted by static. The room dimmed again, another notch lower. The shadows thickened noticeably, the edges of objects growing soft and blurred like heat-warped air. Hannah whimpered, clutching her knees tighter. "Not again," she whispered. "Please, not again." Denise snapped out of her frozen state, rushing to the door. She grabbed the handle and slammed her entire weight into it. "Help me!" she cried. "All of you, help me!" She was beyond reason now, driven by the raw animal instinct to escape. I joined her, pushing my shoulder against the door. Emilio rose shakily and staggered over, adding his weight. Hannah, trembling, crawled forward to help. Together, the four of us shoved until our bones hurt. The door didn't move, not even a centimeter. It was like pushing against the foundation of the building itself. "Why won't it open?" Denise sobbed. "Why won't it?" A soft click sounded behind us. We froze. Not the door, not the lights, the center of the room. Marcus exhaled through his nose, the faintest sign of dread passing across his expression. "It's shifting," he said quietly. "The room's changing shape again." We turned slowly. The center of the room, the empty space where the circle had once been, looked wrong. Not darker, not shadowed, just deeper, as if the floor dipped in a shallow angle, a sinking subtle enough to question your own eyes. Hannah's voice cracked. "It's making another entrance. We need to stay away from it," I said, pulling Denise backward with me. "Everyone get to the walls. Stay in the corners if you can." Marcus shook his head gently. "Corners aren't safe. It likes corners." "Of course it does," I snapped. "It likes everything that kills us." "I never said it kills," he replied evenly. Before I could respond, a thin, hairline crack appeared on the floor where the shadows pooled. It spread in a slow, jagged line outward like a spiderweb forming under pressure. Dust puffed upward with each inch the crack widened. "Stop it!" Denise begged the room itself. "Stop! Please stop!" Something beneath the tile breathed again, this time louder and closer. Emilio backed against the wall, sliding down until he sat curled over his knees, shaking. I can't do this, I can't." "You can," I told him, kneeling beside him, grabbing his shoulders. "Emilio, look at me. You hear me? Look at me. Stay here. Stay with us." He lifted his tear-glazed eyes to mine. "It took her." "I know," I said, feeling my own voice crack, "but we're not giving it anyone else." His gaze flicked past me toward Marcus. "He knows something," Emilio whispered. "He's not surprised. He's not scared." Marcus's eyes flinched, a tiny, involuntary twitch. "Tell us," I said. "Now. Everything." He finally spoke without his practiced calm, without the stiff, emotional distance he'd kept since he entered. "I came here because it followed me," he said quietly, voice strained. "I thought a group would confuse it, that it wouldn't know who to choose." "So this is because of you?" Denise shouted, her voice shaking with outrage. "You brought this here?" He nodded. Shame, not fear, passed over his face. "It doesn't pick randomly." The crack in the floor widened with a sharp snap. Something thumped beneath it, making the tile bounce slightly under our feet. "What does it pick?" I asked. He swallowed. Sweat beaded on his forehead now. "It picks the most afraid person in the room." A horrible silence descended. Slow, crushing. Denise's breath hitched. Emilio froze. Hannah stopped rocking. Marcus continued, voice hoarse. "It waits until someone reaches a peak, until their fear crests. That's how it opens the way below." "And Rachel?" Hannah whispered. "She peaked," Marcus said. "She broke. It took her because she broke." I felt cold down to my bones. Denise whispered, "Then who now?" The room answered for us. A strong, sharp crack tore through the center of the floor. The tile split fully, a jagged opening forming, a black recess like a pupil dilating. A voice whispered up from it, not loud, not clear, but unmistakably directed. "Come closer." It wasn't calling to me, nor Denise, nor Hannah. It was calling to the person shaking the hardest. "Emilio." He let out a strangled gasp and pressed himself against the wall. "No," I breathed. "You're not taking him. You're not." The floor bulged upward like something pushing through. Marcus stepped forward, eyes locked on the rising swell of darkness. "It's choosing again. And this time, it wasn't hesitating." The crack in the floor widened with a slow, deliberate stretch, as if invisible fingers were pulling it apart from below. The room's last bits of fluorescent light bent away from the opening, curving unnaturally, spilling along the edges like it refused to illuminate whatever waited in that dark pit. Emilio clutched his knees, whimpering as he rocked against the wall, his breath hiccuping with pure, helpless terror. "Don't let it take him," Denise whispered, voice breaking. She wasn't talking to Marcus anymore. She wasn't talking to me. She was talking to the room, begging the way a person begs a storm not to tear their roof away. The floor pulsed again. A faint, rhythmic sound came from the widening hollow, irregular breathing. Not ours. Not human. Something shallow and wet, inhaling the air we were exhaling. I held my arms out, stepping between Emilio and the crack. "You're not getting him," I said, though I had no idea who I was speaking to. My voice shook but held. "You're not taking anyone else." Marcus gave me a look that wasn't cruel, wasn't amused, just deeply sad. "It doesn't care what you say, or what any of us say." The darkness throbbed with a pulse. Closer, hungrier. Emilio pressed his head against the wall, sobbing. "Please, please. I don't want to die. I don't want to." "You're not going to die," I said firmly, grabbing his shaking hands. "Look at me. Stay with me. Breathe with me." He tried. God, he tried. His breaths came in ragged gasps, but he held onto my arms like they were anchors in a storm. Then the shadow on the floor moved. Not spread. Moved. It slithered toward us, thin tendrils stretching across the tile like a hand made of smoke and ink. It brushed my shoe. I jerked my foot back instantly, dragging Emilio with me. Hannah screamed. Denise grabbed the chair nearest her and hurled it at the crack. Clanged loudly, metal bending on impact. The chair slid into the hollow and vanished. Not fell, not dropped. Vanished into a space with no sound, no bottom. I felt nausea rise up my throat. "This isn't real," Denise whispered to herself, shaking her head like a mantra. "This isn't real, it isn't real." The room breathed in. Every piece of loose paper lifted. My hair rose slightly with static. Hannah's sketchbook flipped open on its own. A new drawing bled into the page even as we watched. The pencil lines appeared as though an invisible hand were dragging charcoal across paper. It showed Emilio, curled against the wall, shadow tendrils wrapped around his waist, his feet lifting off the floor. "No," Hannah breathed. "No, no, it isn't done. It isn't done." Emilio saw it. He screamed. Not a normal scream. Something deeper, primal, devastating. He tried to crawl sideways along the wall, but the shadows reached him first. A tendril wrapped around his ankle, not physically, but like an anchor grabbing his shadow. His leg jerked violently. He was yanked a half-inch toward the crack. "No!" I lunged forward and grabbed his torso, pulling back with everything in me. Denise grabbed his other arm, and together we strained against the darkness. "Don't let go!" I shouted. "I won't!" Denise cried. The shadows tightened. Another yank. Harder. Emilio's nails scraped the tile, leaving long, desperate marks. His foot slid forward despite everything we were doing, dragging him inch by inch toward the gaping hollow. "Help us!" I screamed at Marcus. "Help us pull him!" Marcus stepped forward, slowly, reluctantly. His hands hovered, trembling slightly. "It won't stop," he said, voice hollow. "You're only delaying it." "Then delay it!" Denise shrieked. "Help us!" Marcus grabbed Emilio's shoulder, and instantly recoiled like he'd been shocked. His hand flew back, fingers trembling. Something black and thin clung to his palm before dissolving into smoke. "It won't let me interfere," he said through clenched teeth. "That's a lie," I yelled. "You're just—" The floor convulsed. A deep, guttural groan echoed from beneath us, like the foundation had a throat. The crack widened, tile bending and snapping as if pulled from underneath. The shadows surged. Emilio screamed as he was tugged forward a full foot, his shoes dragging furrows in the tile. I pulled so hard my muscles burned. Denise braced her feet between us and the wall, leaning backward with all her weight. But the darkness kept dragging him. He was slipping through our hands. "Please, please, don't let it take me, Adrian," Emilio begged, tears streaking his face. "I won't," I whispered, voice cracking. "I won't." But his legs lifted, his body tilted toward the hole, and I knew we were about to lose him. Then the lights snapped on. Not fully, just a flicker, a surge, a momentary flare bright enough to shock the room into clarity. Emilio dropped an inch toward us. The shadows recoiled like they'd been burned. "Keep the lights on," I shouted, but I didn't know how. Denise didn't either. The building wasn't responding to us. Then, a spark. A hum. The electric candle on the floor glowed brighter. Not flickering. Not dimming. Glowing. Marcus stared at it in confusion. That shouldn't happen. I didn't care. The shadows recoiled further. I hauled Emilio backward, dragging him several feet from the crack. Denise helped, sobbing from sheer exertion. Hannah scrambled away from the growing hollow. The room vibrated with an angry tremor. The light dimmed again, but not all the way. The candle held its glow, fighting the dark. The shadows hissed, an awful low sound like static inside a throat. The tendril around Emilio's ankle released, retreating toward the hollow like a living thing burned by something it didn't understand. Emilio collapsed into my arms, shivering, gasping, sobbing. Denise collapsed beside him, choking on relief. Hannah covered her face and thanked a God she didn't believe in. But Marcus stared at the candle like it had betrayed him. "That's not possible," he whispered. "It doesn't make mistakes." I stared at him, breathing hard. "What just happened?" "The room lost its hold," he said, voice thin. "Something disrupted it." "What disrupted it?" Denise demanded. Marcus looked at me, Directly, deeply. You did. Before I could respond, something slammed against the underside of the floor. Once, twice, hard enough to rattle the entire room. The hollow in the tile stretched wide, like a mouth tearing itself open. And the voice from below whispered again, furious this time, "Come back." The floor shuddered so violently it felt like the building was breathing through its foundations. Dust sprayed upward in thin bursts as the crack widened, stretching jagged teeth of broken tile toward us. The voice, if it could be called that, rose from below again, whispering with a guttural, furious urgency. "Come back." Emilio's fingers clamped around my wrist so tightly I felt his nails through my skin. Denise threw her arms in front of him as if she could shield him from a collapsing universe. Hannah crawled backward until her spine hit the far wall, sketchbook held against her chest like a lifeline. Marcus stepped closer to the glowing candle, still stunned by what it was doing. "It's reacting to him," he said, staring at the electric flame that should have been nothing more than a battery-powered prop. The light flickered, then steadied again, brighter, warmer. "I don't understand how, but it sees you now." My stomach twisted. "What does that mean?" "It means—" Marcus hesitated, the first real crack in his composure. "It's rewriting its choice." The shadows surged toward me like they'd been waiting for permission. "No, no, no, Adrian, get back!" Denise shouted, scrambling to her feet, grabbing my arm to pull me toward the wall. But the shadows didn't snap at me the way they had Emilio. They didn't lash or yank. Instead, they moved with a slow, deliberate grace, as if drawn toward me rather than hunting me. "It doesn't want him anymore," Marcus whispered. "It wants you." That hit harder than anything that had happened so far. Couldn't breathe. My heartbeat hammered in my ears like a warning drum. The floor beneath my shoes vibrated with the force of something preparing to breach. "I didn't break," I said, my voice shaking. I'm not." "You didn't break," Marcus agreed. "You disrupted it." "How?" Denise demanded. Marcus stared at the candle. "You looked at it when it wasn't watching." I remembered the moment. The flicker of instinct, my eyes darting to the seat beside me before anything happened. A small movement, a meaningless gesture. But to whatever lived in this room, to whatever measured attention like currency, that had mattered. The candle's light pulsed again, bright enough to sting my eyes. Hannah pointed at it with trembling fingers. It's brighter whenever Adrian stands near it." "What does that mean?" I asked. Marcus swallowed. "It means you're anchoring the room." "What does that even?" A deafening crack split the floor fully open. The ground buckled and dropped several inches. Emilio screamed. Denise grabbed him before he slid into the widening hollow. I fell backward, catching myself with one hand on the tile as the entire room lurched, listing like a sinking ship. From the dark slit beneath us, a shape rose. Indistinct, shifting like liquid shadow but alive, undeniably alive. No face, no limbs, just a colossal presence climbing toward the surface. Hannah's sketchbook fell open again, and a new drawing spilled across the page, lines dragging themselves into form while she watched with shaking hands. It showed the room from above, and in the drawing, all of us were pressed against the walls except one figure, me. Standing at the brink of the hollow, the shadow being towering behind me like it was crowning itself with my silhouette. I felt gravity tilt toward the crack. Something was pulling me. "No," Denise gasped, grabbing my wrist. "No, you are not going." The pull intensified. She held on despite her arms shaking violently. Emilio wrapped one arm around her waist, helping pull me back. Hannah dug her fingers into my other sleeve. Marcus didn't move to help. Instead, he took a single step forward and said, with a strange, solemn certainty, "It just wants one anchor, one presence to connect the room fully, one person to complete the transition." I stared at him in horror. "You knew this could happen." I didn't know, he said quietly. I suspected. And you came anyway? His jaw clenched. It was already following me. I thought, maybe if it had more choices. You thought you could hide in a crowd? I growled, fury rising through terror. You thought you could distract it. He didn't deny it. Something rose from the hole with a deep, resonant hum. The lights above us flickered violently. A hand-shaped ripple of shadow reached across the floor and crawled toward the candle. When it touched the edge of the glow, the light pulsed violently, pushing it back like a heartbeat of resistance. I felt the pull on my body strengthen, like a tide dragging at my bones. No! Denise screamed. Let him go! She braced her legs against the wall and pulled with everything she had. My arm burned. My shoulder threatened to dislocate. I clenched my teeth and pushed back with my own strength, but the room wasn't pulling at my limbs. It was pulling at my shadow. My outline stretched across the cracked floor like a smear of ink dragged toward a drain. Marcus raised his voice for the first time, urgent and brittle. Adrian, don't look into the hollow. Whatever you do, don't look. I looked. Not fully. Just a flicker. Enough. Inside the darkness beneath the floor was not emptiness. Not void. Not space. It was a room. A mirror of ours. Dim, angled, broken. Filled with silhouettes of people frozen mid-scream. Their outlines stretched, warped, fading. A reflection of every person it had ever taken. And in the center of that inverted room, Rachel hung suspended in the dark, her body drifting weightlessly, limbs slack, mouth open in a silent scream. Her eyes snapped open. They locked onto mine, and she whispered a soundless plea. Run. The shadows surged upward like a wave. The pull snapped tight, dragging me forward so hard I slammed onto my knees. Denise lost her grip and fell back into Emilio. The candle toppled and rolled toward the hollow. No! Hannah shrieked. If it goes out. The candle hit the edge of the crack. It didn't fall. It brightened. A violent burst of white light erupted from it, surging across the room in a blinding flash. The shadows recoiled at once. The grip on my shadow snapped. I gasped as control rushed back into my limbs. The hollow in the floor convulsed, shrinking, contracting violently like a wound sealing shut. The shape inside it shrieked in a sound that wasn't sound, a vibration that rattled teeth and bones and the room itself. Then, silence. The crack sealed. The shadows withdrew. The lights steadied. The door unlocked with a soft, casual click. None of us moved. None of us breathed. Marcus stepped forward slowly, staring at the place where the candle still glowed, brighter than any electric candle should. He knelt beside it with trembling hands. It's closed, he whispered. For now. Denise collapsed against the wall, sobbing. Hannah curled into a ball. Emilio prayed under his breath. I stood barely, my legs shaking, staring at the closed floor. We're leaving, I said, voice ragged. All of us. Now. Everyone nodded except Marcus. He didn't look at us. He looked at the candle. Emi, you know it's not over, he said softly. I swallowed. Why not? Because it saw you, he murmured. And you saw it back. A chill ran through me so deep it hollowed my bones. Next time, he whispered. It won't need the room. We left him there. We didn't look back. But even after we fled the building, even hours later, even now as I write this, my shadow hasn't felt like my own. And sometimes, when the room is quiet, I hear breathing beneath the floorboards.